if I pull this off, I want to show people that you can go full electric, get all the benefits of electric, and not compromise. Hi, my name is Madison, also known as the Digital Mermaid or Digimer, and this is my boat, SY Mermaid's Rest. She's a 1981 C&C Landfall 38. I got her with the express intention of converting her to electric and sailing to some fairly distant and sometimes cold places. I chose this boat specifically because I had a really weird set of requirements that I needed. I knew from the time I began that I wanted to have a boat that I could convert to electric. So that meant I needed to find a relatively lightweight boat. The lighter that is, the further you're going to get for a given amount of power in your batteries and with the electric motor. But I wanted a boat I could live on, so I wanted to get the largest boat I could, and those are already competing odds. Then I also wanted to go, I want to go to places like the Arctic and the Antarctic. My ultimate goal years from now is to eventually do the Northwest Passage. I would love to be one of the first electric boats to do that. Knowing that I was going to go to cold climates, I wanted to find a boat that had a relatively small interior space, which is kind of at odds of every boat that's out there. But I wanted the smaller interior space so that it was easier to keep warm. And the C&C Landfall has a bulkhead that separates the companionway, quarter berth, and nav station and makes the interior salon area smaller, so it's easier to keep warm. Sorry if you're hearing the wind. We're filming on a very, very windy night. So I spent most of COVID, when I wanted to be buying a boat and learning to sail and converting it, instead trying to figure out what would be the best boat for my sets of needs. And the C&C Landfall was the boat. There was about 150 of them made, and not a lot of them were up for sale all the time, so I was like, I'm going to have to go pretty much anywhere along the eastern seaboard to find one. So even though I'm from a city outside of Toronto, I found the boat outside of Annapolis, Maryland, and here I am, and now I'm getting ready to take her home. Like a lot of people, when I was first looking at getting into a sailboat, because I wanted to travel long distances and do passages, I did the same thing almost everybody does when they're new. I wanted to find the big, heavy displacement, full keel, catch rig, tank on water, because I figured I'm going to screw up. I'm a novice sailor. I need my boat to save me from myself. But as I learned more and more, I came to realize that there's a lot of downsides to that. Like, trying to maneuver in tight quarters with those types of boats is a nightmare. But more pertinent to me, I came to realize the range I would get, it would fall off a cliff. If I wanted to be able to do the long distance sailing that I have in mind, I couldn't do it. And I had to start looking at lighter boats. So I ended up looking into the racer cruiser variants of boats, which the C&C Landfall is. I needed a boat that was designed to be comfortable. It's like a pure racer hull would give me the absolute best range for the power, but it wouldn't necessarily be that comfortable to live in. So a cruiser racer like this started to make a lot more sense. It's got the light, the low displacement, it's got the speed through the water, it can be pushed fairly easily with a similar amount of power, but it's stout enough that on a passage, if I catch a night like this, I'm not going to be comfortable, but I'll be safe. And somebody said to me at one point, when you're trying to pick a boat, do you want to buy a boat for the once every 2 year storm you get caught in, that you then pay a price for, trying to get in and out of docks? Maybe you don't go out on a weekend because you just can't be arsed to get the boat in and out because it's a pain. Or do you want to just say, look, for these storms, I accept the fact it's not going to be comfortable, but for the rest of the time, I've got a boat that's maneuverable, easy to push, easy to single hand. And that really kind of solidified going to a lighter, I don't want to call it a performance boat, it's still a cruiser boat, but you know what I mean. And having decided that, yes, I accept the fact that I'll be uncomfortable in heavy weather, now the question just became, what gives me I wanted a boat that was large enough that I could have crew, so I needed to have 1 or 2 cabins, which this kind of sort of has, but was small enough that I could single hand. Again, as I was looking through all of the trade-offs, and there's no such thing as a perfect boat. Anybody watching this channel probably already knows that. It's a question of which boats have the pros you need and the cons you can live with. Over those 2 years-ish of COVID, I dialed in more and more specifically on this particular boat. And by the time I decided this is the boat I wanted, this was the only boat I wanted. I was looking for a C&C Landfall 38, period. How much research did you do before deciding on an electric propulsion system, and what were the key factors you considered during your research? So, funny enough, as I sit here in my boat with my entirely built battery system and all of my electrics that go with it, I still haven't chose my electric motor. So, when I say that I did a lot of research, I don't want it to potentially scare other people who want to do this off, like, oh, I can't do this unless I do a lot of research. I'm the kind of person with ADHD. I don't just look at something, I deep dive into something. It's all I can do. So I did a lot of research, but it's not necessary if you want to do your own electric conversion. You will need to do research. The degree to which I'm building my own system from raw cells that I bought from Alibaba from China, getting all of the raw equipment and tying it together, building my own wires, building my own bus bars. This is a level of DIY that is kind of silly. So if the biggest thing I want to say when I'm answering this question is sort of a bit tangential, because I don't want to scare anyone off of doing their own conversion. You could do a conversion a lot easier than I did. But I did put a lot of research in, largely out of, well, 2 reasons I did a lot of research. Before I got into sailing, before I bought a sailboat, I had a lot of people tell me, if you're going to buy a sailboat, you have to be a diesel mechanic. Because if you're sailing offshore and something breaks down, you can't call for help. You've got to figure out how to fix it yourself. No, thank you. I didn't want to do that. I like angry pixies. I understand them better. So I thought, well, if I'm going to be sailing offshore and I have to be able to fix my own system, what better way to know how to fix something than to build it yourself? So part of the reason I did so much research before I bought the boat, I mean, the battery was already, No, I ordered all of the batteries just after I bought the boat. But by that point, I had done a whole bunch of work up to that point. I built my first battery at that point before I even bought the boat. If you're looking to do an electric conversion and you're planning to do offshore, you'll probably want to be closer to doing a lot more of your own research like I did so that you can fix it yourself. If you're building your own cables, it means you've got the hydraulic crimpers, you know why you've chosen the cables you did, the ring terminals you did, and if something breaks on passage, you can fix it yourself. If you're a weekender going out for, a few days at a time, you're never really out of radio contact and you can call Tow USA or whatever your country's tow is, you're perfectly fine just buying pre-built batteries, an electric motor, and go. And if you're willing to do that, and especially if budget's not really a limiting factor, you can get pre-built systems from companies like Ocean Volt where they sell you the batteries and the motor and everything. And if you go to them and you say to them, here's my boat, I want to make it electric, I want this much range, they'll sit down with you and help you figure everything out. They'll explain why they're recommending what they're doing, and you just buy it and install it. That's kind of like the minimum amount of research you need to do. But you're going to pay more for it. So if you're budget constrained, or you want to know your system more, or whatever, you're going to want to do more research. I'm sorry, this is me saying what you should do and what you should plan for when the question is, what should I do? But I guess this comes back to my YouTube channel. Everything's like, here's how I'm doing it, so that you can take this as a model and go do it yourself in your own way. To continue the answer, one of the key things for me, because I plan to go fairly far offshore and I have a sailboat, I don't have a lot of space for solar panels. And that's how most people typically recharge their batteries. If you've got a catamaran, you can put a lot of solar up there and awesome, you don't need to worry about regen. For me, because I have such a huge bank, even if I get 1400 watts, which is my target up on my boat, I've got an 86,000 watt system with a 1400 watt solar panel. You can do the math. That's a lot of sunshine to charge that thing back up. It's not going to work. It's not viable. So for me in my research, I really was depending on regeneration from my propeller when I'm under sail. So as I'm being pulled through the water by the wind, it spins my prop, and that's my alternator of a sort. Trying to find a company that will allow you to use their motor to charge your batteries is not easy. And most of the companies that are out there, because this is still fairly early days, they want to sell an entire ecosystem, which comes back to a company like Ocean Vault. I reached out to them, and I'm like, hey, if I buy your motor, can I charge my batteries? And they're like, no, Torqeedo's the same. I wanted to use Torqeedo for a long time. And they were like, well, we think you can. And I finally kind of like went to the Annapolis Boat Show, and I'm like, yes or no? No. So because regen is such an important part of my battery charging strategy, I still haven't found an answer yet. I'm leaning towards a company called eTech. That's probably where I'm going to go. But I had to do a lot of this research because I've got this weird configuration that most electric sailboats don't need to worry about. So as of right now, I have built all of my batteries. I already have my inverter charger for the 48 volt bank. I have my 12 volt batteries built, but now that I've been on the boat, I can go back and I'm going to rework my 12 volt system for a bit. I also just picked up a 12 volt inverter charger. It's all Victron stuff. The power system from the battery, charging, house loads, navigation and whatnot, all of the power systems there have been decided. I have not yet decided on my new navigation system. I haven't chosen a multifunction. I haven't decided. I'm leaning towards Raymarine. There's pros and cons to all of them. Raymarine happens to fit me. I may go with OpenPlotter or OpenCPN or PyPilot and just try to build a complete open source boat myself if I feel so silly. But from a electric conversion perspective, all of the batteries are built. I still have to build the housings for them, but all of the electrics have been figured out. I am 90% sure I know which electric motor I want. I've been trying to get them to answer some technical questions, and I think I annoy a lot of companies because I have very technical questions for them. But regardless, I'm pretty sure I've got the electric motor set up. Obviously, I've already bought the boat. I know exactly what boat I want. I'm sitting in it. I have to get the boat home, and as soon as I get home, it's going up in the hard and the engine's being ripped out. So, I am I would say maybe at the halfway mark. I think that might be a fair way to say it. If you wanted to just a real simple, straight, you've done nothing, you're sailing, I'm probably about halfway. Have you considered the environmental benefits of an electric propulsion system, and how do they align with your values? This is a question. My answer is going to be a little bit tangential, but bear with me. I think a lot of people have this idea that the reason you go electric is because you're a tree hugger, which, to be fair, guilty as charged. But the reasons for going electric, I mentioned earlier about how it was the noise of the diesel that was my primary driving factor to go electric. There is a lot of argument like, oh, well, you think you're being an environmentalist, but what about all the mining to get the materials and the waste afterwards and yada, yada, yada? I'm not going to get into those arguments, not in this video, because that's a big topic. Join me on my boat, and we'll have a couple drinks, and I will go into it. Long story short, though, actually, you know what? I'm going to go a little bit into it. Right now, we're at the birth of a new, I don't want to say technology, market, however you would describe it, with the electric cars are finally viable and taking off. Electric sailboats are finally viable and taking off. Electric grid storage, so that you can keep your house powered up when the power goes out via Tesla Powerwalls or similar things. Large private batteries in various contexts are just now becoming viable things that, generally speaking, the mass populace wants. If only a small percentage of the mass populace, a marked percentage of it. Because this is a new technology, you have a massive demand that's currently outstripping the ability to get the resources out of the ground. Now, a lot of the environmental concerns around electric propulsion are based around things like the extraction of cobalt, problematic materials, chemicals, raw materials that using cobalt as one example, you could elaborate this to other chemicals and raw materials you might need. It comes from countries with questionable child labor laws or environmental impact. So, they're sucking the cobalt out and they're doing a lot of damage to their environment where they're doing it. And these are real issues, and they're issues that must be addressed. But allow me to bring it back specifically to the electric sailboat world. With something like an electric car, you're looking for maximum energy density. So they tend to use cobalt-based chemistries, and cobalt is problematic. On a sailboat, the only lithium chemistry that you should consider is lithium iron phosphate. When it goes into thermal runaway, its thermal runaway stays cool enough that it doesn't cause fires. ABOIC, they just recently took, there's a letter from the president where there's these stories that have been going around the sailing community of fires that were supposedly caused by lithium iron phosphate batteries. And if I say lithium batteries, I'm speaking about lithium iron phosphate batteries, not any of the other chemistries. Where there's a few famous stories of water ingress, post-accident damage to the batteries and whatnot that eventually led to fires. ABYC took all of these anecdotes and they did their best to try to reproduce it, and none of them caught fire. Separate from that, because of the work I've been doing through my channel and building my battery systems, I've been looking at scientific research studies where they've tested intentionally, brutally abusing the batteries to see if they could trigger a thermal runaway event that would lead to a fire, and none of them could do it. So if you are looking at making an electric boat, you are looking at lithium iron phosphate. Getting back to the environmental argument. Lithium, you can get that from literally just taking a bunch of seawater and putting it in big standing ponds and wait for it to evaporate away, and you're left with the salts that come out, and in that you can get lithium. It's not difficult to get lithium. It's not environmentally damaging to get lithium. Iron, it's fair to say that's a pretty abundant material, and phosphate, pretty abundant material as well. So looking specifically at lithium iron phosphate batteries, you don't really have any problematic chemicals there. Great. Let's assume there was a problematic chemical. Let's assume that we were using cobalt, which then steps into the argument of electric cars and whatnot, which is, I think, part and parcel of the larger argument of electric boats as an environmental act. During the initial ramp-up time, you are sucking up a lot of new materials that have to be extracted from the ground, but we're going to hit a tipping point where we hit market saturation. And once we hit market saturation, you have old batteries and vehicles coming off the market, vehicles being cars or boats, coming off the market at roughly the same rate that new batteries are being built. And you go into this recycle cycle. And in that, the need for resource extraction drops dramatically. You're only replenishing the percentage that is lost to this recycling cycle. So right now, yes, there's a lot of environmental impact in resource extraction, but that's temporary. It's part of this transition. And as time goes on, people are going to get better at it. They're going to find cleaner ways to get this. Where things like cobalt is being extracted at the cost of the environment or human suffering, there will be movements to clean up those industries. We've seen this happen in numerous other industries. Great. That's part of the environmental impact. And part of the whole cradle to grave, it's like, oh, well, you've got an electric boat, you're not burning diesel, haha, look at you, you're so much better for the environment. Well, okay, but you look cradle to grave. Even cradle to grave, and there's studies showing this, it is environmentally better. There's lower impact using electric from cradle to grave. But that's not really the argument here. That's not the primary reason people are going to electric sailboats. Going to an electric sailboat has so many advantages above and beyond the environmental benefits. I started this by saying that I wanted to have an electric sailboat because I didn't want to listen to the noise. It drives me insane. That was my driver. The fact that it's also beneficial to the environment is an additional reason, not the reason. I talked earlier about how with an electric propulsion system, you have a functionally, dramatically simpler system that requires way less maintenance. You don't have to worry about oils being spilled overboard. You don't have to worry about diesel being spilled overboard. You don't have to worry about filters constantly being replaced. So when you're looking at moving to electric, or you hear of somebody who's moving to electric, it's understandable to say, oh, well, they must be doing it for environmental reasons. And absolutely, some of them, that is their driver. But the simplicity of operation, I mentioned earlier about how on demand, I don't have a startup procedure. I don't have a shutdown procedure. I want power, I move lever. I'm done with power, I reset lever. Done. I don't have active cooling. It's passively cooled as a pod in the water. I don't have oil changes. I don't worry about how many hours are on my motor. I mean, you do, because you still have to worry about anodes and whatnot, but it's such a dramatically easier technology to live with. Now, one of the big things that people often say when they're looking at electric propulsion is, oh, well, especially if you're looking at someone like me who wants to do long passages, well, what are you going to do if you have to outrun a storm? What are you going to do if? So I sat down and I ran the numbers. My boat has a 30-gallon diesel tank. My Yanmar 3QM30, if anyone wants to fact check me, I believe, I can't remember exactly the numbers, but I believe at 2200 RPM, which would get me to about 5 or 6 knots, I would have about 20 hours of runtime on my motor at that RPM before my tank is depleted. And that would get me to about 5 or 6 knots. I could run my electric propulsion at about 5 or 6 knots, which would be about half throttle, about 6 kilowatts. On an 86 kilowatt hour bank, I have over 15 hours of runtime. So I have 75% of the range on my electric propulsion that I did on my diesel propulsion. Now here is where things get really beneficial. And this is a bit different with my boat because I'm building such a massive battery bank. I can make my own fuel on their way. If I got a sunny day, that power is coming in. If I'm running under sail and I can turn on regen on my prop, I'm getting power back in. So considering if I had a diesel version of me and an electric version of me and it was just a side-by-side, 50% throttle, go, the diesel's going to win. But that's not how we sail. It's you run for a little bit, you stop for a bit. As soon as I stop, I dip on my batteries and they start to come back up again. So given the real world travel, I would argue I have greater range as an electric propulsion vehicle or vessel than a diesel does, because you can't run a diesel refinery on the back of your boat. Not anyone who's doing sail. I mean, maybe Jeff Bezos or someone like that has that kind of money. But over the course of a season, a lot of sailboats, you'll buy diesel at the beginning of the season. You might fill up a couple times during the season. You don't use a lot of diesel, but you still have to get it. I don't. Every time, if my boat is sitting here and I'm doing nothing, solar panels generate electricity, my batteries are ticking up. So I would argue that in a real world scenario, I have greater range. That is a huge benefit. And if I want to go to far off places and I run out of gas, I just wait. Or I wait for the wind to pick up and I sail and I get regen. I wait for the sun to come out and I got solar coming in. What are you going to do if you run out of diesel? What are you going to do if your fuel pump fails? What are you going to do if you have a leak in your tank and your diesel dumps into the bilge and you're done? I would argue I'm more resilient and I have longer range. Now, let me build on that a little bit. Most DIY sailboat conversions have been using batteries in the 10 to 20 kilowatt range. And I'm sure this is going to change. If you're watching this a few years from now, maybe this doesn't apply anymore. But in 2022, 23, when this is being filmed, typical homebrew DIY conversions are 10 to 20 kilowatts. Pre-built electric yachts that you can buy new now tend to be in the 20 to 30 kilowatt range. Of course, there's a few that go higher. I think the largest I've seen in a pre-built is like 40 kilowatt hours. I have 86. But when you have a nascent technology, and I'm sorry if this is going to sound arrogant, I really don't mean it to sound this way, but one of the things I'm trying to do with my electric boat is I want to show people that in the same way when Tesla came along and started, and I know there's a lot of politics around Tesla, set that aside. Before Tesla came out with their first electric cars were, the old Simpsons cartoon. I don't go very fast, I can't go very far. That's how electric cars were seen. They were seen as something that you had to severely compromise in order to have. And then Tesla comes along and says, no, go have fun. And they completely changed the script. Call me arrogant as hell. Maybe I am. But that's kind of what I'm trying to do with showing a big 86 kilowatt hour bank on a 38-foot boat. You don't have to compromise anymore. The technology is there. Can you go out and buy these batteries for an affordable price? No, not yet, but give it a few years and you will. So going to electric, yes, there are environmental benefits. And for some, that is the driving force. But that is just a small part of the benefits of going electric. What are your future sailing plans? Was electric propulsion system a thought process in those plans? Obviously, as the answers I've given up till now, it's electric and sailing to me go hand in hand. I can't separate the two. So yes, all of my plans on sailing have been based around being electric. Knowing that I want to go to remote northern locations, I have a dream I mentioned earlier about being one of the first electric boats, if not the first electric sailboat, to do the Northwest Passage. Is that going to happen? We'll see. Is that sensible? Oh God, no. But I mean, if I was sensible, I wouldn't be here right now, would I? Nobody buys a sailboat because they're making good financial decisions or are making good life decisions, period. You do it because you're driven by your heart. One of the places I want to hit, my most northern part that is on my wish list, is I want to hit Alert Nunavut, 83 degrees north. I would leave there, go over the north of Greenland, and go south to Svalbard. So, yeah. So knowing that I wanted to go, I want to go down to the Antarctic. I want to see the old whaling huts where, to this day, from like 100 years ago, you can still see tin provisions on the shells. One of the big things that really appealed to me about sailing is I'm very, very fortunate in my life that I've had a fair bit of traveling. And what I've come to realize very quickly in my traveling is that I have almost no interest in seeing the standard tourist attractions. You know, I've been to Japan 4 times. I went to Kyoto once, and I was like, all right, cool. I saw the big bamboo thing. I saw the almost the tunnel of Torii, like the very typical Japanese things. And I was like, this doesn't do anything for me. But then I would meet up with some people I knew, and we'd go to a scuzzy izakaya in some corner of Tokyo and get shit-faced eating bad food in some basement. And pardon my language, I flipping loved it. My favorite place I've ever been to in Japan was Tottori, which is like the smallest, poorest prefecture. But when I went there, I felt like I actually saw real Japan. When I was in Czech Republic, going to like just regular bars in some back corner, I want to go to the places that airplanes don't fly, is the short way I can describe my travel ambitions. Whenever I'm watching something on YouTube or Nebula or whatever, and they talk about some weird little corner place that like has like 50 people living at it, I'm like, Google Maps, places to go, bookmark. And I have this list of bookmarks of all of these weird places. My grandfather's a World War II vet. Because of that, I took a bit of an interest in World War II history. I want to sail to Iwo Jima, but not just Iwo Jima. All of the Pacific Islands where some of this absolutely brutal hand-to-hand combat happened. Not because I think there's any glorification in war, quite the opposite. I think there's horror in war and nothing else, but if the war is forgotten, war is repeated. So, I mean, okay, that sounds kind of grandiose. Who am I to sit there and be like, oh, I'm going to go see these islands and stop World War? No, of course not. But it's just, it's fed into my interest of trying to learn as much about the history as I can. Going to the old whaling cabins that haven't been touched in 100 years and haven't been, vandalized, because who goes there? You can't go there unless you're mad. I want to go to Point Nemo, which is the Atlantic zone of inaccessibility, or no, it's in the Pacific. They also call it the spaceship graveyard. Whenever they're deorbiting, like the Mir spaceship, or the space station, and eventually the International Space Station, whenever a big orbiting object needs to be deorbited, they crash it into the Pacific. Why? Because it is so far removed from shipping lanes and living people that it's relatively safe. Because we're not talking a pistol here. You ain't going to aim this too well. It's like, we're just going to land generally in this area. That's a great place to do it because nobody's there. I want to be there. You can get to the Point Nemo, and while you're there, If you wait for the International Space Station to pass over you, the closest humans to you are the astronauts on the International Space Station. And apparently, and I'm going to have to get my ham radio license to do this, but I want to get to Point Nemo, the Pacific Zone of Inaccessibility, whatever it's called, sit there and every 90 minutes radio the International Space Station. This is SY Mermaid's Rest calling the International Space Station. Do you read? I'm sure eventually they'll be like, oh fuck, we're just going to answer her so she'll shut up and go away. But I have this huge dream to have the International Space Station just acknowledge me, like, notice me, senpai. Just to be able to say that I talked to the astronauts in the International Space Station and they were the closest humans to me. This is the kind of thing. I want to go to the Faroe Islands. I want to go to Alert. I want to go to Svalbard. I want to go to Nuuk. I want to go to these Pacific Islands. I want to go to these places that most people don't go. And more importantly, and this ties into the YouTube channel, one of the biggest things I wanted out of the YouTube channel was enough of an audience that wherever I go, I can find somebody to break bread with. Hey, I'm going to be in weird-ass location. Anybody there? Meet me at the dock. Let's go for drinks. Drinks on me. Because it's one thing to travel to a location. I got very, very fortunate a while back, and I got to travel to Singapore in circumstances that don't really matter, but the key takeaway is I got to meet locals. Locals were like, hey, let us show you around. And I got a tour of Singapore, and it's like, oh yeah, this was a great bathhouse, and oh, this was this stuff that's never on tourist stuff. That is what feeds my soul. I want to travel places that nobody, like, they just people don't go to. And I want to go places that airplanes don't go. There is the summary of it. And to do that with an electric boat, I have to have a boat that has very good range. And I want to prove that it can be done. Since I've started this, I have had so many people tell me, you can't do it, it's not going to work. You know what? Maybe they're right. Maybe my YouTube channel will turn into a cautionary tale. But if I pull it off, and this is a little bit of arrogance speaking, but allow me it. If I pull it off, this is why I made the comparison to Tesla earlier, where they made electric cars fun, no compromise. If I pull this off, I want to show people that you can go full electric, get all the benefits of electric, and not compromise. Tell us about your YouTube channel and how do we find you? I am The Digital Mermaid at The Digital Mermaid on YouTube. That's pretty much it. The single biggest reason I set up my YouTube channel is because I wanted to show, by showing me as somebody who knew nothing about sailing, knew nothing about batteries, knew nothing about electric propulsion when I started, I wanted to show the process of learning. If you've got a big idea, a big dream that you want to follow, the biggest reason I would suggest to follow my channel is to see that failing is okay. Failing is normal. Failing is part of learning. That's fundamentally at the core what my channel's about. It's okay to screw up. You pick yourself up, you brush it off, and you get back on the horse. So, if you want to see somebody try to do something big, and hey, listen, I'm not done yet. I might still fail, but I might succeed. And either way, I'm going to have a great story to tell. And my biggest want for my YouTube channel is to hear other people who took a chance and tried to chase their own dreams. Because even if you try and fail, you tried. And that's more than a lot of people can say.